Hey guys, it's Tanya from Royal City Nursery, and today we've got a bit of a treat for you. We are going to take a tour through my garden, and we are standing in front of my house right now. What I think we actually need to start with is to figure out what I started with here and how we did that. So we bought this house, we are about five and a half years ago, and one of the reasons we bought it when we moved in is there wasn't a very complicated landscape. Not to say what was here was wrong or bad, it just didn't suit our taste, and that's no problem. But one of the things we really enjoyed about this landscape is there wasn't a lot of it, so it meant we didn't have to deconstruct a whole ton of it. So when we started, we actually started with a whole ton of asphalt. And I know it sounds a little weird, but when we look at the driveway, against the house there was a concrete sidewalk that ran to the side doors, and then this particular asphalt bit, come on in, ran up to about here, about this pot. So all of this was driveway. And one of our biggest concerns was to make this a little bit softer, right? We have an affinity for plants, so we want to incorporate our plants into our landscapes. In doing so, it makes it a little bit softer. The other thing that was here that we definitely do not and will not disturb are these spruce trees that are sitting above me. Near as we can tell, these Norway spruce are probably about 45 to 50 years old, and they're at least a good 30-40 feet in height. They offer a ton of shade for the house, so I don't want to disturb that. They offer a ton of noise attenuation, so they help cut the noise from the busy roadway. They also are a fantastic habitat for a whole ton of wildlife. And one of the things we've seen here since we put the garden in 2.5 to 3 years ago is a huge uptick in birds. We probably have a good 30 to 35 different bird species that use this garden, and that for us was both a surprise and a motivator. So it keeps us going in terms of what we're planting. So some of the things that we did for our garden or for our front landscape is, for us, we really want to treat this like a entrance space. But more than that, because the house is so long and because our front yard is fairly wide and fairly big, we want to help take the proportion down. So we want to scale it down. One of the ways we do that from a design perspective is to make it feel like you've got individual rooms. So we're standing in the very first room we created, which is our entrance space. That's probably the easiest way to describe it. One of the things we wanted to do was control where people park. And I know, hey, it's my house, it's Dave's house, so we're gonna park wherever the heck we like. But one of the things we want to do is just tell our guests when they come that, hey, we need to park here. So one of the first things we did is cut the asphalt out, and if you actually take a look down, we installed this small apron. And one of the things this particular interlock does is actually bump our parking out, so people automatically park out here, right? They're not coming up and kissing the garden, and it's kind of wild if you think about it. All we've done is put a line on the ground. We haven't changed the grade, right? You can get over it, you can jump through it, whatever, but it's subconsciously one of the things we've done is encourage people to say, hey, there's a line here. So we're conditioned to park on asphalt, so we find the majority of our guests park on the asphalt and leave this walking space open. Makes it a little bit easier. The other thing we've done, and Cass will be able to take you through it, you'll see that we've cut the asphalt and the concrete sidewalk out. So right against the house, we've got a bunch of planting. Why we did that? We wanted to scale the planting down, we wanted to scale the house down with planting. And for me, it's also all about creating texture. So when you look at it, we've got a row of Karl Forester grasses, and they start on the very far left and run all the way around the house. They even run in through our garden space. So that's this row here. That's these guys. And then the Carl Foresters pick up across the pathway and complete down to the driveway. So again, what that does, that row really forces this driveway space to be a little bit more of our public entrance space. When we think about rooms, you always have a hallway or a porch. So essentially, think of this as our porch. We brought our porch out further, which makes it a little bit easier to do. Come on in. We're going to walk through a series of different decks. When you think about it, decks are not normally used as a front walkway or front entrance. Well, one of the things that we needed to do here is if we look at that front porch, so we think about where the concrete on the front porch is, and we think about the difference in grade to what I'm standing above, and that's almost 2 feet. So we've got a good 24 inches that we need to make up. The other thing that we want to think about when we put in our front walkway is these 2 giant spruce trees. They're very well established. I don't want to damage them at all, which meant we don't want to dig into the soil because I don't want to sever the roots on those at all, both from a safety perspective and also from a tree perspective, right? Those trees have been here for a long time. They deserve to be here for longer still. So if we're not digging in the ground, that means we need to go on top of the ground. And decks were one of the ways we could figure out how to do that because everything floats. So this way, when we put all the posts in, we could go around the roots and we didn't damage the spruce trees at all. The other thing that the series of decks do is help spread out our stairs, right? So we know that there's 2 feet difference from the top of the porch to grade out here, which means we've got to come up with anywhere between, let's see, 24 inches divided by 7 1/4. We've got to come up with roughly 5 stairs. Yeah, maybe 4. So we have a choice. We can put all of those together and do them in a staircase, or we can spread them apart. By spreading them apart like this, it helps actually create a series of different rooms. So we talked about the entrance that's over in the asphalt, and now we're into another room here where this particular deck is large enough that if we want, we can actually put we can put a couple of chairs, we can put a bistro table, and hit some of our favorite views. So as Cassandra's panning through our plant material, you just saw a whole bunch of grasses. Grasses for both Dave and I are one of our absolute favorite plants. One of the reasons we like them is because you get a sense of motion. There's a very slight breeze today, and you can see them just kind of moving. So we want to keep that going. The other thing that we find that with both Dave and I is we have absolutely opposite tastes in colors and in gardens, which is always kind of weird. So for me, I am very much about subtles. I prefer neutral colors, and I prefer preferably no color at all. I love textures. I love different leaf. I love evergreen, and I love the play on texture on texture on texture. And I would be happy if there wasn't a stitch of a flower in there. Dave, on the other hand, is very much a riot of color kind of guy. He loves multi-lights on a Christmas tree. I love white. So some years, yeah, we get white. But in order to, again, we want to compromise, right? So grasses are one of the things that both of us agree on. And as we work through our landscape, there's a whole bunch of plants in here that both of us agree on. Again, we want to keep it a little, for me, I want to keep it to neutral. Dave wants pops of color. So we got to figure out how both of those get married into one space. So come on up into our decks a little bit further. And we are gonna start with our bubbling rock. This rock for us, super, super important. And when you think about the placement, it's hard to see from the driveway, and that's okay, because we place this rock where we spend the most time. Where we spend the most time, unfortunately, is in the house. So this is one that lines up directly with our living room window. So when we're inside, we can see, and it also means that we see not only the rock, the bubbling, we can hear it. So right now you should be able to hear just a little bit of a babble. The highway's going on. The highway's fairly noisy this morning, but on a peaceful day, I don't need to open up the windows. I can hear this inside, which is absolutely perfect. We keep this rock running 365 days a year. And one of the nice things about it is that we get a ton of birds. This is one of the things that attracts the birds. I've got woodpeckers, 3 or 4 different kinds of woodpeckers, 4 or 5 different kinds of finches, plus a ton of other birds. Orioles we saw for the first time this year. We're seeing a whole bunch of wrens now, and all of them, believe it or not, stand in the top and take a bath. They all do that in January too. It's just a little chilly, but hey, no problem. It means we keep the birds in our yard. The other nice thing about this bubbling rock is that we see a ton of insects using it. So all of the bees and the pollinator insects all sit on the top and use that both as a bath and as a water source. So super, super important. One of the things we did when we placed the rock too is take a look back in here, and you're going to find a gray tube. That gray tube connects to our sump pump that's located in our basement, and in the springtime that sump pump runs a lot, so it actually empties out into the basin for the rock. So for the spring it gives us our filling, so we can be a little bit more water conscious in what we do. The other thing we did when we placed the rock and we built the basin for it is we included an overflow valve. So rather than having water go absolutely everywhere, we directed it. And our overflow actually comes under those 2 rocks and then comes straight through here underneath this hosta that's doing phenomenally well, underneath the ligularia. This is one of the plants that both Dave and I absolutely agree on. Ligularias love damp semi-shade, and because of the overflow valve on our rock, it gets it and we don't have to water it. And then the overflow runs through the rest of the garden and runs out underneath the decks. Again, super, super easy to deal with. And because we're putting water where we want it, it also means we can generally tend to plant things that are a little bit more appropriate for some kind of wet soil. When we think about some of the other plant material that we've got in here, against the porch we have a snow mound spirea. This is Dave's favorite kind of spirea, so this gets white flowers in the springtime and turns anywhere from yellow to orange in the fall. And if we come back across, we're going to pan across to the left, we've got a weeping acrocona spruce, and then there's a number of different junipers in here too. So again, when we plant a garden, we want to plan the garden so at least 25 to 30% of it is evergreen, and another 20 to 30% is grasses. As we pan across the sides, so right against the walkway, now this walkway is the same stone that we've done on the apron for the driveway. On either side of the walkway, we've got a grass called a Hacknacloa. Love that name. I love the grass, I love the name, and we use it because we like the name. So again, it's a Hacknacloa, and Hacknacloas love semi-shade, and they need a little bit of damp or a little bit of moisture. So this is one that we know we've got to water. The rest of the garden is all planned for drought tolerant and dry shade up here. So that's what we're seeing on my left, your right. This is part of the original part of the garden. So there's a few things in here that were original, the rest of them are ours. So we've just started a bunch of hostas. And when you look at our garden, one of the things to keep in mind is a lot of times we're trialing things. So I want to see how far we can push a few things, right? So we want to see how plants perform in certain environments. So that way, when we are recommending them for you, we know exactly what to expect. So it's not unusual for this garden to change every 2 or 3 or 4 years as we figure out stuff, and if stuff doesn't work, out it comes and something new goes in. So that is what brings us to this stump. And right now, this little guy here. This is a blood good Japanese maple that did really, really well for about 3 or 4 years. And unfortunately, for whatever reason this winter, not so hot. I have a sneaky suspicion our rabbits are an issue, but we're still trying to figure out what to put here. And no different than you, when you've got a spot that you sort of stumped on, sometimes you just need to leave it and let it sit. Ideally, what we want for this space is I'd love something that's going to be about 6 to 8 feet tall and about 6 to 8 feet wide. So then we help take a little bit of the focus and balance out the rock and balance out that weeping spruce on the other side. So hopefully sometime this fall we'll find just the perfect plant to pop in this space. So come on up, we'll take a look at this from the other end. One of the things that's super important in any garden is to figure out where your views are, to figure out what you're seeing out your kitchen window. So where's the kitchen sink? To figure out what you're seeing outside your office window if you're spending a lot of time in your office, or if you're spending a lot of time in the living room. So a lot of the plant material that's out here is designed to be seen from inside. The other thing that we've done is really think about the heights of the plant material, because we want to make sure we're seeing at least the tops of the plants from inside. So when we think about the ligularia or the grasses that you see out in the garden, those guys, we're seeing the top 3 or 4 inches from inside. So it helps bring that garden experience out, which is super, super important when you're designing. So that's one of the very, very first things that my grandfather taught me. That's also one of the very first things that we talked about when I did the Bachelor of Landscape Architecture at the University of Guelph, is we want to really start to figure out how we can marry that indoor and outdoor space. The very first thing you need to do is think about what your indoor views are. So right now you're seeing one of our biggest views. This is our view from the office. And just imagine this. You can hear the birds chirping in the background. You can hear the bubbling rock going. But just imagine this on a very, very peaceful night, and you've got a glass of wine and a book. I'm pretty much set to head there now. I hope you are too. We're going to do a couple of others on a few other parts of our yard, so I'll see you soon. Have fun, guys. Bye-bye.